The Black Race, Racism, Chapter 3. The United States stands accused today not only of imprisoning more people than any other country on earth, but having institutionalized police death squads. A curfew and state of emergency remains in force 40 miles from the White House in the city of Baltimore, Maryland. After the unexplained brutal death of 21-year-old African-American Freddie Gray in police custody, nearly 200 Americans have been killed by the U.S. police this year, the vast majority unarmed. Just like in Britain, police seldom, if ever, faced justice for killing people when it came to the killing of Mark Duggan in London, which sparked civil unrest across England. The coverage is as predictable as one would expect for most mainstream media outlets. It's devoid of any historical context, devoid of the reality of African American life. President Obama was very quick to condemn the looting, but not so quick to condemn the execution squads. And that isn't an exaggeration. Freddie Gray's name is added to a long and sordid list that includes 7-year-old Aiyana Jones, pensioner and former Marine Kenneth Chamberlain, that includes the more well-known Oscar Grant and Ramalli Graham, and of course all those killed by vigilantes. Unpunished murder in the world's self-styled largest democracy. I wouldn't call it anti-Americanism. Being critical of the shortcomings of a society doesn't mean you're into any of that society. In fact, it means you are pro that society because it means you want better for that society. But those who wish for America to remain an overtly or covertly white supremacy state in which black people are kept in their place, so to speak, think to criticize those. This causes anti-American within the UK because of the welfare state and various other mitigating circumstances. The situation is an ecstatic stream. So it would be an exaggeration to say it's the same, but there are broad similarities. There is a long history of police fatality towards particularly black and Asian communities, but even Irish communities when the Irish were considered the enemy in this country. And that continues unbated and unpunished to this day. And then the coverage is the same. In a society like this, on private property, to be poor is a crime. To be poor and black is especially a crime. And so those narratives are birthed out of this set of ideologies. To give a profound counterbalance, where the Norwegian terrorist a few years ago killed 78 people, or the pilot of that Germanwings flight deliberately crashed 150 people into the side of a mountain because they're white or portrayed with more humanity in the media than teenage black victims of state murder. It's a mess. It creates despondency. It creates a feeling of desperation. One of the reasons the Scottish independence referendum was so successful in terms of turnout was because there was a practical outcome. If you live in a segregated community, even in this community, or relatively a place where police brutality and poverty and imperialism and maybe the problems that affect you, you don't see anyone who really looks like they're going to challenge that. It's going to make you despondent towards the whole democratic process. If there are people in your community who have been killed or died suspiciously in police custody, and you've seen how the process of justice pans out for people like you, you're not going to have that much faith in the so-called democratic forces of the nation. After Operation Black Vote, Berlin and of itself is not a bad idea. I argue in that black communities can and should potentially organize to vote around particular issues that affect them particularly, in potentially swing seats, as long as we're honest about the limitations of that. But problematizing black people who don't vote is quite patronizing, and this kind of finger wagging of if you don't vote, you're taking the color out of Britain, naturally is going to offend some people. That puts some people off. What needs to be questioned is the lack of direct democracy that we experienced. It causes the despondency, not people's unwillingness to participate in what many see as a paper democracy, which has not that much real value for the day-to-day circumstance. Obama is in the White House right now as the bombing of an African country has occurred on his watch. So, merely having someone with a bit of melanin dress up capitalism and white supremacy and all of these other ills of society doesn't do anything to change anything if that person does not have a different agenda. Someone isn't necessarily moral just because they have a darker shade of skin. So, to me, when I see people being adopted by the political establishment, I like to see their rhetoric changes. It's normal, particularly if you've grown up in a poor environment. No one wants to stay poor despite love in your community. So someone offers you money and a salary and a steady job. Those things are attractive to everyone you know. So It's not even a personal indictment always of those people. It's an indictment of the nature, the way politics are played. British foreign policy combined with the profits of transnational corporations will be sprinkled down, and that does make a difference. Minimum wage changing are small practical differences that do affect people's everyday lives within Britain. But we're not for justice if you're only for justice within Britain. If we're saying we want a decent standard of living, we want this, we want that, but we don't really mind what our government does elsewhere in the world to give us that standard of living. Austerity can be manipulated. Difficult circumstances can be manipulated. We've seen the whip enough of this anti-immigration nonsense by some of the many mainstream parties, but particularly by the new kids on the block. But we see how rather than addressing who is in charge of the poverty in your community, the Bangladeshi immigrant who cleans your local school, or the person who controls the levers of power and privilege in the society. I mean, the unintelligence of the argument is outstanding, but it seems to be the given good grace by the mainstream. Ironically, I'm not actually as pessimistic as a reality would sometimes force us to be. The fact is, as we're seeing embalmers, we're seeing all across the globe, as we're seeing an inspiring bravo from Los Angeles who's become a guerrilla gardener, and one of the best yet was in America. He goes around growing stuff on the pavement so people can feed themselves nutritious food, because nutritious food is not available in the segregated ghettos of America. What I'm seeing is people refuse to just die quietly and give up and become the ants and insignificant dots that people wish poor people, particularly poor people of color, would be. There is still resistance. There is still humanity. There is still determination in spite of all the odds. And to me, I'm very inspired by that. And I see despite the changes that we face. There will always be resistance, and there will always be forms of victory, if not victory overall. Summarizing, we have a degree of more freedom, but really that also comes down to the people at home, the supporters who allow independent eyes. The reason for blacks on your land is because your forefathers, though maltreating them, couldn't stand the beauties before them, and as such couldn't keep it in their pants as they raped and impregnated so many of them, who today have become generations on your land. Shame on you if you can't shame your people for their diabolic acts, plus a double shame on you if you bypass it to look down upon other people. If in your own rooms you have black shoes or other accessories in different colors just for its beauty, then there's no bigger hypocrite than yourself. For as humans, you prefer other colors of subjects made of man for how beautiful they look, and reject that made of God. Then you pass better off as a fool, because God is no fool to have created black people. He also did to beautify his creation. Can you imagine everything as white? From trees to oceans to fishes to roads and even to food? God is indeed a wise God.
Stacy Amewoyi developed a knack for writing and sharing real-life stories with the world through her first set of bestsellers, which include The Price of Love, The Language and Keys of Love, The Science of Love, The King's Choice, My True Life Story, You Only See My Beauty, You Don't Know My Story, as well as a critically acclaimed 3-part novel titled The Missing Fathers Volume 1, When All Hopes Fade Away, The Missing Fathers Volume 2, Dear Father, Read This and Come Back, The Missing Fathers Volume 3, A Time Capsule of the Globe. Watch out for her next set of books titled Africa and the African, The Rising Stars, Africa and the African, A Giant in Slumber, Africa and the African, The Fallen Powers, and existing simultaneously as allies. You can grab copies of Stacy Amewoyi's books, available in hard and soft copies, as well as audiobooks on various digital platforms and ebook stores, including Amazon, Walmart, Nook, Google Books, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, Audible, Goodreads, Ingram Spark, and www.stacymfoundation.org. Proudly sponsored by the King's Choice Publishing House, Mawina Multimedia, The 360 Show with Stacy, New York Fashion Boutique, New York Beauty Supply, Stacy M Foundation, and SMA Ultimate Services.